I'm delighted to welcome my daughter today, Kelly Bruno, who got her bachelor's degree in biology at the University of Colorado last year in May of 2014. So Kelly's been working at the Butterfly Pavilion for several years now. Before that, for most of her life, she's been a lover of insects. And working at the pavilion and getting a degree in biology just fed that interest. So she's going to give a little bit of introductory material on herself, so I won't belabor the point. I'll just let her take over.
Thanks, Dad. Well, my name is Kelly. I am a Colorado native. I've been running around in Colorado since 1992 when I was born, and I graduated from the Children's Commerce Center up on the hill in 1997. And for much of my time in my college career, I spent my days in Ramaley. And during my sophomore year, that was incredibly important because I was also conducting my own field study. And so Ramaley was where I spent most of my days organizing the spiders, talking with people who knew about the spiders, and so on and so forth. But this is just my field study, and in this study that I conducted, I was able to compare the predator-prey relationships between grasshoppers and spiders in a high plains grassland over the course of a couple of semesters. And this was really good, and this was really cool because I got to make my own poster, and this was actually an award-winning poster in one of my courses that I took. And all of this shows my data and the whole process here. But that's not just why I'm here. I'm here to talk to you about one of the most fascinating creatures on the planet, in my opinion, animals that's near and dear to the heart of the pavilion, the spiders. So what is a spider? I'm going to start with the basics. Spiders come from the phylum Arthropoda, and that means that they have an exoskeleton made out of chitin, and if you look at your fingernails, chitin is the main component of it. So it's a pretty tough material, and it's also kind of flexible. So they have that body armor. They also have jointed leg segments so that they can move around a little more easily. And they also have segmented bodies. Now the spiders are highly important predators of insects. It's an early estimation, and actually highly accepted even now, the weight of insects eaten every year by spiders is estimated to easily outweigh the entire human population. Wow. And they are also highly diverse. There's a little over 42,000 described species of spider in the world, and scientists estimate that's only about half of what they think is out there. And their distribution is incredible. They range from on every continent except Antarctica, and even there they have found remnants of spider bodies, some of the silk there. So even though these animals haven't managed to take root there, they have been able to reach in those areas. But one of the most common known things about them is that they are widely feared. They rank amongst the top 10 phobias worldwide, and I found that kind of fascinating early on in my study of spiders. So I did a little investigating, and there are a couple of theories on this. The first one being the evolution theory. Since all spiders are venomous, there would be a survival advantage to avoiding them. Makes sense, except a lot of scientists argue that the danger posed by spiders isn't sufficient enough to warrant an evolutionary change. And still others argue that the fear of spiders is disproportional to the fear of more dangerous animals. For instance, a person who could be terrified of spiders, but they might not think twice about petting a lion, who, if they did attack, would more than likely do fatal damage, whereas a spider would probably send you to the hospital for a couple of days. So there was another theory that I found, and this is a cultural theory, and this is that the view of society on the spiders influences how we as individuals react towards the animals. And our culture tends to portray spiders in a kind of negative light. And when I say negative, it's not that they're always portrayed as the villain. They're more portrayed as survivalists who have no sense of distinguishing friend from foe. They just eat whatever they can, whether they're the good guy or the bad guy. And this is through our media or through children's rhymes. And just for some examples, we have a classic one, Aragog from Harry Potter. He's not really a villain, but he doesn't have this moral sense any farther than the one who raised him. You have Shelob from Lord of the Rings, Little Miss Muffet. And while I do have Spider-Man up here, I found that people really aren't more afraid of him, and I think that's because he doesn't really look like a spider. He has some of the more cooler powers that spiders can exhibit, but he doesn't look like one. He has this really bright costume, but it really doesn't look very much like a spider. So now I'm going to go into what they really are. This is just a very simplified taxonomy, and what we actually consider spiders are in these last three suborders, and the over 42,000 species that have been described are mostly composed of these two, the Megalomorphae and the Araneomorphae. The Megalomorphae are the large tarantulas, such as Rosie, and the Araneomorphae are the true spiders, the ones you'll find in your house. And there are some subtle differences between these two, and I will go over this, but in order to do that, we have to look at some anatomical similarities between these two creatures in order to see what are some of the physical differences that we use as scientists to tell them apart and how we categorize them. And so we're going to look a little more at the anatomy. This is the external anatomy. We have three views of the spider. This one is the most classic one, where you look at from the top. And spiders have two body segments, the cephalothorax and the abdomen. And the cephalothorax contains the eyes and the mouth parts, and the mouth parts contain what we call chelicerae, or the jointed mouth segments, and that's usually what you see. The fangs are attached, and they're actually usually hidden. And also the palps, or the pedipalps. These are the leg-like segments that you see up front, and these actually play an important role in holding on to the prey while the spider is feeding, but also, in both tarantulas and true spiders, it plays an important role in sexual reproduction. And also on the cephalothorax, we have the 4 pairs of jointed legs and a narrow waist attaching to the abdomen. And the abdomen itself contains the majority of the internal organs, including the respiration system, which are these. The external part, visual part, are the book lungs right here. And also they contain the spinnerets, where the silk comes from. Now, the book lungs are kind of interesting because it's a very passive way of breathing. So what happens is these are just infoldings of tissue, and the reason they are called book lungs is because scientists said, well, they look like a stack of books. So they call them that. They're just thin layers of tissue that are open partly to the outside atmosphere. So the air is just passively flows into the book tissue, and inside here is the spider's body fluid, which we call hemolymph. And so the oxygen simply gets absorbed into the hemolymph, and the heart, which is right here, actively pumps that oxygen around through the body. So the organs are simply bathed in this oxygen-filled hemolymph. And the hemolymph doesn't transport oxygen. It can transport hormones. It keeps the organs from getting dried out. But interestingly enough, excuse me a moment, the hemolymph is used in movement. Spiders and tarantulas are some of the only known arthropods to lack muscles to extend their legs. It's not really understood why. They just don't have, they have muscles to contract legs, but the extension muscles are just absent. And for most arthropods, this is very unusual. So how do they move? They build up blood pressure in the joints, very much like water filling up a limp hose. So if the pressure builds up in the joints, the leg has to extend. And so that by controlling that and using their contracting muscles and this controlled pressure, they can move around with not exact fluidity the way we do. And I personally think that this is one of the reasons why people get creeped out by the way they move. It's because it doesn't look very fluid. It looks very mechanical. And so it's actually kind of easy to reproduce this kind of motion with mechanical toys. And so it's basically hydraulic blood pressure pumping the joints. But when they dehydrate too much, you get this. And this spider I called Biggin, he was a donation from Elizabeth, and he came to me like this. His legs were completely contracted, but he was still alive. This is just a little water pillow that he's drinking from right here. He was able to rehydrate and stand up slightly. He wasn't fully able to extend his legs, but he was able to hunt a bit, and he was able to walk around with some mobility. But that is just a really interesting thing that I love to point out to people, that the hemolymph plays such an important role in the motion. And it makes a lot more people comfortable with how these spiders move, and makes them feel a lot more comfortable about the animals themselves. And now that we've gone over some of the anatomical similarities, I'm going to go over some of the differences between how those arrangements work and the numbers, to see how we classify the differences between tarantulas and spiders. First one being, spiders have about 6 to 8 eyes in multiple sizes and arrangements. These can be so specific that that arachnologists like myself can determine the families that spiders belong to just by looking at the eye patterns. I can tell you, for instance, that this one and this one are the Salticidae, or the jumping spiders, simply because of their large frontal eyes and the surrounding ones on the side of the head. And that this one is an ogre face, or a gladiator spider, simply by the very large eyes up front here for good vision at night. And that this one's a wolf spider, simply by looking at their eye pattern. So a new spider species, we can simply categorize it down to family just by looking at the eye patterns. This is not the case with tarantulas. Tarantulas can have about 8 eyes, but they're small and clumped together in a very tight, compact position that's really difficult to even look at with the naked eye. This is a close-up of the Goliath bird eater, and this is a little farther away, but you can see, even with this close-up view, how tiny they are. The eyes are very useless to these animals. They move around and they live through touch and sensory perception. They don't leave their burrows very often, so they simply use those long hairs on their bodies to detect slight changes in air pressure. Rosie, for instance, her hairs can be so sensitive that she can detect an insect flapping its wing at the opposite end of that room. That is how sensitive she is. Also, the number of book lungs is very useful. Spiders only have a single pair, probably due to their size, but they only need a single pair of book lungs, whereas the tarantulas require 2 pairs of book lungs for their bulk. And finally, the chelicerae and fang orientation is very important. This is probably one of the most important characteristics, because spiders evolved this sort of a method, which is very much like scissors going back and forth. And this is a little more of a derived method, because tarantulas in the fossil record go back farther than the spiders. And their method is much more like a dagger stabbing down. So they stab down vertically. And this is considered a much more primitive method, because if you have this, then you don't have to be pinning it down with your body and risking having something kicked and splitting your belly open. But also the fact that these animals were more recently in the fossil record. But that's one of the very important differences that we use to look at the differences between spiders and tarantulas. But just because they have these different things, they have very similar behaviors. For instance, the sexual reproduction is very much a similar pattern. For instance, the male spiders and tarantulas both have enlarged pedipalps. And this is how we tell the difference between the male and the female. The males use their enlarged pedipalps, as you can see here, with these 2 spiders and this tarantula. They're enlarged and complex with tubes and sacs. And that's because they put the sperm there, and they use those to insert sperm into the female's fertilization furrow, which we call the epigema, and that's just on her belly. And all spiders actually perform very complex courtship rituals in terms of mating, because they have to inform the female, who can be several times larger than the male, that they are not food. So sometimes they'll use pheromones. Sometimes they'll use the pheromones to knock the female unconscious. I have seen this, and the male will actually use vibrations to keep her constantly aware that he's still there, that he's not going to do her any harm, so he'll do those vibrations. But in order to get close to her, they will pluck little love strings on a web builder, on a female's big web, or they'll do a dance to attract her attention. And they do these so specifically that each species is unique. And this is because you don't want to mate with the wrong female because she won't even let you get close. She will just view you as dinner. And because of this specific rituals, the males are rarely treated aggressively before or after mating. They usually get out there quickly enough before the female gets angry. Now, sometimes the female does snack, but this is really just to make sure that the female is interested and that he doesn't try to mate with someone who's already mated, because then she's just going to eat him. One of my favorites, and probably what everyone's favorite, is the jumping spiders. They do this amazing little dance. This is for every one of them, very specific. They use their front legs, which the males often have little stripes of white, as you can see here, and they lift them up and do a specific dance. One of the most colorful of the displays is the peacock jumping spider. These little tiny jumping spiders from Australia actually have an iridescent flap of skin over their butts, and they literally wiggle their butts and flap the skin up, and it furls out like this. This is not their abdomen. Their abdomen is behind it. This is just a flap of skin, and they'll shake this and wave their arms down like this in a very specific pattern to get the female's attention. So the flashier and the more bold and obvious the display, the more likely it's going to catch her attention, because it's going to attract predators. And for every animal, when a male is this showy and he's alive and he's a long survivor, it tells the female that he is good at staying alive. He's got very good genes. So that's what the females look for. And that's why these displays have gotten so visual and very complex. And of course, as a result, all tarantulas and spiders lay eggs, and they all do this with some sort of an egg sac. So this is just a female lynx spider, and she's actually laid all of her eggs in this tiny drop that's actually expanded and started to dry on the outside. On the inside, it's formed like this gel to keep the babies from getting dried out, which is a big danger. And what she does is she makes this nice padded area for the babies to be laid on, and then she'll lay some more silk over the top and then fold it over and then cover the whole thing with a protective layering of waterproof silk. So silk is really a huge part of the spider's lives, and it's really one of the more classic aspects of these animals. Sorry. Thirsty. But these spider egg sacs again, they're made of this specialized tough silk, but they can contain 40 to over 100 of these eggs. So we have all these different types of egg sacs, each of these females guarding them very aggressively. But again, talking about the silk being such an important part of their lives, it's literally one of their trademarks. If you see a cobweb, you immediately start wondering, where's the spider? So I wanted to talk more about the silk. The silk is an integral part of the spider's lives. It provides a safety net for them when they're getting caught on something, or if they fall, they have that safety line so that they can reel themselves back up. They have webs for catching flying insects, death shrouds for struggling prey, sacs to help the developing young stay safe, and just burrow lining to prevent cave-ins. The silk production isn't really unique to spiders. There's several insect species that can produce silk at least one point in their lives. For instance, the lacewings will produce it when they're adults to keep the eggs safe from hungry ants. The silk moth will use it as the outer layer of their cocoon. But spiders are able to produce it their entire lives. And they're also have not seem to have lost their ability through evolution. And when I say that, throughout the fossil record, scientists have always been able to identify for the actual spiders an organ on the abdomen that resembles a spinneret. So they believe that silk has been a huge part for a large portion of their evolution. So this silk production also appears to be a key part in their diversity because of the huge properties of this silk, being able to be sticky, strong, elastic, waterproof, etc. Without all of these components, spiders might not have been able to dive into the niches that they've been able to. This is just a look at some of the spinneret's complexity of an orb weaver. Not all spiders have this. This is just one of the more classic looks of a very ornate spider spinnerets. Most of them don't have this. Some of the tarantulas only have like 4 pairs of spinnerets because their silk isn't necessary for that kind of web building. And all the silk organs inside are able to produce all these different properties, and some of these orb weavers have like 7 types of silk glands just to produce one different type of silk, and each of them for these different types of purposes. So the structure of the silk is actually pretty interesting because it's made of multiple fibrils that are connected through beta pleat sheets and amorphous elastic strands. So these beta pleat sheets are a really interesting part of it because they're the real key to how the spider silk works. Beta pleat sheets are one of the most stable protein structures in the natural world, and that's because of the hydrogen bonding going on here. And they have so much hydrogen bonds, and it's basically this accordion shape. So if something pushes on these silk strands, you can see these will just sort of stretch, and the hydrogen bonds will allow it to move, but then suddenly they're sprung back together because they're so close together, and they have so many of these packed into one single fibril that the web is able to absorb large amounts of energy without losing its original shape. And just looking at a comparison between Kevlar and the stronger silk, which is considered to be the spider's drag line, on average, they're not as strong. They'll break sooner than an equally thin strand of Kevlar, but it's able to absorb almost 5 times the energy. And just to have a look at some numbers, the golden orb weaver, and there are different species of these, but on average, they have about a tensile strength of about 1,200 megapascals. Now this means that a strand of silk about the diameter of a human hair can hold up about 1 pound before breaking. So imagine a full can of soda, which is about a pound, being held up by a strand of something that's the size of a human hair. That is the tensile strength of the golden orb weaver. And just so you know, this is the male, and that is the female. Just for a size comparison. That is why he has to do those love songs. And this one is kind of my favorite because this one is a recent discovery. Almost 100 years after Charles Darwin's publication of Origin of Species, they discovered a orb weaver whose webs at its longest strand can measure up to 25 meters. This one is the Darwin bark orb weaver. This one has almost twice the tensile strength. So imagine the strand of a human hair holding up 2 cans of soda. That is what this guy does. And this is actually the size of the spider right here. And this is a size comparison. So it goes all the way down to the ground. And the reason it's so big is because this actually forms a niche over riverbeds. It actually spans riverbanks, which is really, really cool. So just another look at some other uses of spider silk. These are some of my favorites. This one is the trapdoor spider. And the trapdoor spider is considered the more ancient of the spiders because they still have this plates of armor on their abdomens, which is found in one of their closest relatives, the scorpion. But they have this clever little technique where they dig a burrow, very much like other tarantulas, lining it with silk, but then setting out these tripwires. And not only that, they make a silken lid and then cover it with leaves and debris, and then they hide inside the burrow with their feet on the trip lines and wait for something to make some irregular motion on maybe 1 or 2 or even 3 of these trip lines, and that signals to them that there's something out there that might be worth capturing. So they charge out, grab what's ever there, and pull it back in. And this one is a kind of common thing with nursery web spiders and wolf spiders, but the mother will actually make her egg sac, and then to help the babies develop faster, she will attach it to silk on her spinnerets and carry them around and have them warm up in the sun. And once the babies hatch, she doesn't abandon them yet. She actually lets them climb on her abdomen, and they attach themselves to her using their own silk, which they're able to produce as soon as they're born. And after about a week, she kicks them off, and they start wandering off on their own. And they may do something like this, which is the spider ballooning. And even Charles Darwin had noticed that on the Beagle there were spiders out in the middle of the ocean landing on his ship, and he had no idea how they were doing it. That is showing you how successful this dispersion method is. And they also have found recently, in recent publications, that
there's a talk supposed to go on at 10:30. In the room, I believe. I'll go talk to the scheduler.
And they found that these spider babies can actually do sailing. They actually will catch the wind on the water, lift their legs up, and just sail across the water so they don't drown. And when they find something solid that they want to grab onto, they just put a drag line down and grab on. Now this one right here is rather interesting because it has an enlarged head. This one's only about the size of a grain of rice. It's called the spitting spider. Its head is enlarged because it has not only a venom sac in its head, it also has a silk gland. And this is for producing sticky silk. So this fly right here, because this guy doesn't move very fast, is pinned down by this spray of silk. And so as the animal struggles, it dries. And this fly is basically easy pickings. And this one is definitely one of my favorites, the gladiator spider. This fellow makes a net that he holds above, just holds down like this, and he waits for something to pass underneath. And this is why they have such large eyes. They can see as well as a cat at night. And so he'll wait for something to crawl beneath him, and then he'll throw the net around them, pull it up, and use that net to wrap around the prey item. And the prey can't bust out of it because the silk just stretches. And so because of all of this, these amazing properties that silk has, and since spider silk is considered the strongest silk in the natural world, there's been some talk for many years, centuries even, about using spider silk to make clothing, and recently investigations of using it to make body armor. This would be great because it would be and to have it so that it's not dependent on the spider's availability. So some of the things they would do to harvest the silk would be to put them in these little stocks and to literally just harvest the silk from some of these female spiders, since they are the ones that have the stronger silk, especially of the orb weavers. And one of the most famous clothing designs was this, made by some people in Madagascar. And this is from the Madagascar golden orb weaver silk. It took almost 1.2 million female spiders and 7 years to construct this entire cape. So, exactly, it's expensive. So they thought, so there's been investigation of how do we make it synthetic? That way it's less expensive, we can have it, a lot more of it, and we don't deplete the actual animal. One of the most interesting ways is genetically altering animals, and one of the earliest ones was the spider goats. They actually injected the DNA from Latrodectus, which is the black widow spider, injected it into the goats, and they were able to produce silk proteins in their milk. And so they were able to isolate it through filtration to get this paste of silk proteins. And it didn't stop at goats. They tried with tomato plants, E. coli, silkworms, yeasts. But again, this process was expensive, and more importantly, the actual product was not as strong as the genuine spider silk. Oop. So it's been still a huge study trying to get it to be more of a stronger substance. And so it's a really huge thing because it could be used in medical fields as little things that could hold a wound together as well. That's a common use of it. But it's not just there that we use the spiders for medical uses. Their venom has a huge role in that. And this is a question that we always get, asked I get 100 times a day. Is this animal dangerous? And I always tell them we don't know of any such thing as a poisonous spider. But again, they are all venomous. There's a few subtle differences between poison and venom. Poison is a toxin that's produced by the organism. They actually use their own energy to produce it because it's a specialized saliva. And poison is a toxin that's simply sequestered by an organism from other deadly things. Venom also has to be actively injected into a victim, whereas poison can be passively absorbed through the skin or passively ingested. All right, we're going to continue. That was interesting. Hopefully we haven't traumatized the critters. I doubt it. They're not really easily traumatized. All right, so going back to, so I stopped off where the venom has to be actively injected. They have to actively bite you in order to get that toxin to take effect. And poison, you can either ingest it or absorb it, but it's very passive, so the animal doesn't actively do anything. They usually just secrete it on their bodies, but it's not actively, they don't actively do anything. And also, the venom is used usually to immobilize prey. And this, I say it's usually because we still have things like bees, ants. They don't really use their venom to immobilize prey. They just use it for defense. But for the most part, prey immobilization is what venom is used for. And the poison is usually used for avoiding predators, usually to deter them from taking a bite. But again, there's always the exceptions in nature. And spider venom is actually really interesting. The active ingredient is the polyamines. That's the important part. And the whole point of these polyamines is to prevent the release of glutamate, which is a main component not just in vertebrates, but in every animal. Glutamate is a main neurotransmitter. So by preventing the release of this neurotransmitter, you get paralyzed, which is the whole idea of the venom. It's not to kill an animal, it's to make sure they don't put up a fight. They do like their fresh meat. So one of the more I'm just going to go over some of the more famous examples of venomous spiders. And of course, the nearest dear one to Colorado is the black widow. It's the most venomous spider in Colorado. Usually they're found amongst wood piles, and very rarely will they come out and be aggressive. They're usually very recluse, very shy animals. They only really act aggressively when the female's guarding her eggs. But for the most part, they just don't like being interacted with. And their venom that we have is latrotoxin. And the main one we worry about is the alpha latrotoxin. It has other latrotoxins in there, which is really kind of interesting. But this one actually affects us, the alpha latrotoxin. And it affects the motor end nerves and the endocrine cells. And what it does is it pokes holes in the animal lipid bilayer. It's kind of like a ninja star. So it pokes holes in the animal lipid bilayer and allows the calcium ions to flow in. Because every one of our nerves is basically like an electric capacitor. So having these calcium ions flow in means that the capacitor is broken. So you can't fire the nerves. The nerves are broken. But and as I said, there were other latrotoxins in there. And the reason is because each of these latrotoxins target a different type of organism. The alpha latrotoxin targets the vertebrates. There's another latrotoxin that targets the insects. And then there's another one that actually targets crustaceans. We're not exactly sure why they target crustaceans, but perhaps they want to cover all the bases of potential food items or potential predators. So this one is a very expensive, very dangerous venom. But this venom is only dangerous as a tetramer. And like I said, when I said ninja star, this is why. Every section is basically like a ninja star point. So they don't come like this. They actually come in these different little parts and then connect together as a tetramer. And now I'm going to go on to another animal, the brown recluse. The brown recluse is often, people get so freaked out about this one, even though, like the black widow, and pretty much in their name, they're very recluse. The only time they'll actually bite is if you touch them, or even not if you touch them, just if you enclose them and they feel like there's no other way out, then they will bite. And people say, oh, I got bitten by a brown recluse and I get this huge ulcer right here. Well, the reason why you get that kind of bite is because of the venom. The venom contains sphingomyelinase D. And what that does, it turns sphingomyelin into ceramide 1 phosphate. Sphingomyelin is the main component of animal cell membranes, and ceramide 1 phosphate is involved in programmed cell death. So the cells look for this compound when it's time to die. And so it's using your own body's technique against you, but it's not a big one. It's just using a little area. This is about a 7-month-old or 12-month-old wound from a brown recluse, and as you can see, there's a whole amount of dead cells. But what's interesting about these two is that they can control the venom injection. They can give you what's called a dry bite, which means they try to scare you without injecting any venom. And they can release a full-blown attack, or they can give you just a small amount that won't result in something that bad. But again, as I was saying a little bit beforehand, with the eye patterns, we always get people say, oh my gosh, is this a brown recluse? Is this a brown recluse? Because it's got the violin shape. A lot of spiders have the violin shape. But only the brown recluse has this 6-eye arrangement. 2 eyes here, 2 eyes here, and 2 eyes here. It looks kind of evil, but they're pretty shy animals. Now the next one is, I'm not going to say not evil, but they are pretty cool. The Sydney funnel web spider. And this one has an interesting neurotoxin. It's a delta ultracotoxin, and it's one of the world's most highly studied spider venoms because they tend to bite more than the other spiders do. So it's a sodium ion channel inhibitor, and it actually affects primates more than other mammals. It's more deadly to primates, and it's not really understood why. But what's interesting is that these guys actually usually, even as adults, they usually inject venom when they bite. So the others, I was saying, they can give you a dry bite. These guys usually will rarely ever give you a dry bite, and they will tend to strike repeatedly in a very defensive mechanism. If you touch them again, they will bite. If you don't, if you leave them alone, they have no reason to bite. But it's the males that are more toxic, and it's the males that tend to do the most injuries because they wander looking for females, and they wander into the Australian people's homes, and they like to hide in shoes, under gloves, places where people have to use their hands to grab something. And again, they are actually more toxic than the females, which is very unusual. But that's what makes these guys such a highly studied spider venom, because the attacks are so frequent. They don't kill, but they are very painful. This is just the delta ultracotoxin structure, just a stick and ball method, looking at the complexity of it. But spider venom isn't just something to be scary of. It's hugely studied in the medical field because of its uses. Clearly it's used for anti-venom, but it's rarely ever advised that you take anti-venom because anti-venoms contain horse serum. And if you are allergic to horse serum, which is more than likely in some cases, it's going to do more damage than the actual venom. So usually the doctors say just take painkillers, let it work through your system. If you're a healthy adult, you're not going to die, but it will be painful in some cases. But also investigations into the treatment of Alzheimer's, specifically the black widow venom, because it does induce this calcium ion flow. It could break up the plaque that builds up in your brain during Alzheimer's, so there's that investigation. The delaying the effects of Duchenne's muscular dystrophy, and also as an eco-friendly and pest-specific pesticide. And of course, it's a very specific pain medication to block certain pain receptors, just sort of like snake venom. And also some investigations about it being used for cancer treatment. And why I have question marks there is there's no published works about this type of study. It's very early in the works, but it could be that next time you see a spider, their venom might help you or a family relative. God forbid they ever get cancer. Now, obtaining the spider venom is rather interesting. You can milk it like a snake, similar to a snake, from the live animal. You can take it from the prepared venom glands, or you can take it from extract it from the cephalothorax, or the part of the cephalothorax that you would find the venom in. And the Sydney funnel web is more than happy to allow you to milk its venom from the live animal. This is technically usually how they do it. They try to irritate it, and I don't know if you can see it, but the shine right here is actually the venom starting to form a droplet. So they try to irritate the animal, have it rear up so they can reach the fangs, and use a pipette to take the venom drop by drop from the animal. And these animals are incredibly wonderful creatures, and at the pavilion I've had such an awesome opportunity to observe them, other types of insects, and I'm sure some of you here have seen the pavilion. We've gotten some new exhibits lately. I would invite you to come this weekend to our Insectable. It's our 20th birthday, and you can come in again and see our chrysalis chambers. We've had a lot more types come in lately. We've gotten some African moon moths, atlas moths. Got some really cool bird-winged butterflies. Larry the dove is still there. Sunshine, our red-footed tortoise, has her own little pen, so you can see her a little easier. The room itself has gotten wonderful. The plants have grown since our 20 years, beautifully kept up, and our grounds are still pretty amazing. We've expanded a bit. We have nature trails, or you can walk them freely yourselves. Maybe even see our beavers in the lake area that we have. See some of our insects, which are in full bloom right now. And of course, you will see Rosie, our tarantula, at the pavilion. She's still there. She is as popular as ever. And I have brought some of my friends from the pavilion with me here today. And I'll take Rosie out if you want to hold her. And if you guys have any questions right now, please feel free to ask me, and I will be happy to answer them to the best of my abilities. And if I can't answer them, I will be happy to investigate them for you. If you ever come across a spider or an insect that you don't know about, or you don't want to touch it, you can take a picture of it. Try to get really good detail of it, because we can't really identify it if it's just a little blur on the camera. But try to get the face, try to get as close as you can to it, and as many things that you think would be good for identification based on this talk, and just your own studies and investigations and your own judgment. Or if you feel like you're confident enough to grab it, I will be happy to accept donations as well. And yes, I will be happy to answer any further questions you may have. Amazing scientists here, and thank you, Dad, for this chance to come here and talk to all of you. I'm really, really thrilled that there was such a huge crowd here today, and I really hope that you guys will come and see us at the Butterfly Pavilion. We are really just thrilled to have people coming and visiting us and learning all sorts of things about the work that we do with conservation and all of our projects with growth studies. Just feel free to ask us anything you wish, and we will, to the best of our ability, answer them. We have some great staff there. We have a bunch of wonderful volunteers who will be happy to direct you to anybody, or even answer the questions themselves. So again, feel free to ask me any questions. Thank you for this opportunity. I'm very happy to be here today. Yes?
Thank you for a really nice talk. It was a first for me to hear that some of the species move with pressured legs, as you described. So that brought up a question in combination with book lungs. How does altitude affect that? We have less oxygen with the book lungs not so being effective. The pressurizing probably works better with lower pressure at high altitude. So can they spring higher? Are they more active? How does that
Well,
affect it?
actually, spiders themselves, I don't believe tarantulas can get into high altitudes because, again, their bulk and the fact that it's really important for them to have a good large supply of food so that when they do eat, that they have a large animal that they can feed on. So they have a slow metabolism. They don't need to feed that often, but when they do, it has to be a substantial meal. But actually, up in the Himalayas, they have found a species of jumping spider. And those are the really active ones, but they are completely content. They're very small, so they don't necessarily need so much of the book lungs help because their bodies are small enough to make use of all of that oxygen that they can use. So not big, and they're not really big up there. And jumping spiders themselves are pretty small, but yeah, they are pretty active still. They still jump from area to area. They are very active hunters, very visual. But altitude does not seem to affect them because their size does not really allows them to gain that area without having too many consequences. And they don't go up incredibly high. I'm not exactly sure of the number off the top of my head, but it's pretty high up in the Himalayas that they've been found. Mm-hmm.
I've always wondered how they make the first strand, like those orb weaver webs.
Yes.
Over a river.
What they do is they send out, it's not the big drag line, they send out a strong enough one that they can crawl across, but it's just a light strand. They just send it out and they just lengthen it and lengthen it and lengthen it, and they let the wind take it until it hits and sticks to something. And once that happens and they can feel it, then they crawl across, and while they're doing that, they'll be dragging a stronger drag line across, and then they'll actually eat, and then they'll crawl back and start eating the first structure piece. Because the proteins in there is actually another form of food. They can actually eat their silk to recycle it. So that's one way they do things, but that starting strand is they just let something go out, and when that happens, that's where you get these very large webs with a small spider in there, but yeah, that's how they do that.
You said there were three categories: the true spiders, the tarantulas, and the third one. What was
The
that?
mesothelae. The reason why the mesothelae, I can go back to that. The reason why I didn't really talk about mesothelae, let me get there. Mesothelae is a more ancient group, and they're small spiders, but they actually also have these little, I don't know if you can see, but these are little platelets of armor. But they're very small. They're only represented by a single family and only a couple of species in that family. So again, when I was talking about the over 42,000 described species, the majority of them now only exist in these two. And this one, I believe, is the largest and most diverse of those. But these two are the main components, and mesothelae is only a couple of species in there. Mm-hmm.
So I know you were talking about like how durable like the webs and the silk are, but like how long does the average web like last?
About a day, because they will actually deconstruct their webs, eat the silk, and they'll construct a new one every night. So some of the orb weavers will construct a new web every night. Sometimes it'll take them just an hour, and because the webs, again, they do get tattered, and they can sometimes have them stay for maybe a couple of days, but it just makes more sense for them to eat the silk after a single night, and they just make a new fresh web every night.
So can you kind of give me an idea of the production speed of that silk in meters per second, feet per hour, whatever number? Is there typical, or is that very diverse with the species?
It does stay diverse in species, because actually there is another species of spider. They actually consider this a web, but they call it the bolus spider, and all the web consists of is the spider has anchors itself to just anything, and then it has like this fishing line with a drop of glue at the end, and when it feels like a moth going around, it just swings it around and it's basically like a lasso, and they do this very successfully because moths are loaded with fat. So, and if they don't succeed, they just wait, make the thing still, and then wait for it to come by again and just swing it around. So I mean, that's considered a web. There's one that's just like this triangle. They make this triangular arrow-shaped web, and it's just this little string. And these are still an orb weaver, but they will have this extra stuff that they tie up really tightly, and then when they feel something land on the web part, they'll actually release the extra string and just charge forward. The triangular part of the web glues down on the fly, because flies are very difficult to catch. And so they actually specialize in very fast, alert insects. And so the animal is trapped, and the spider can go down and grab it. And they're very small at doing that, but they are. So it depends on the animal, but they have so many different ways of trapping these insects. They are known for being trapping specialists and ambush predators. And some of them, again, are the active hunters, and they use their silk just like safety lines so they know where their burrow is. Mm-hmm.
I've heard that some of the small migrating spiders have actually been found in the jet stream. Do you know if that's true, and if it is, how they can manage to survive?
Well, again, they're very hardy animals. They can make the most. I wouldn't doubt that they would manage to get into the jet stream. Any insect that they have a very slow metabolism again, and as long as there's potential food there, they will make the most of it. And if they're,
transport.
Yeah.
oh, they can they'll go with any sort of transport. Some of them will hitch a ride on packages. That's how some spiders get around. We've had huntsman spiders travel from Australia to here, and they really don't do any damage. They eat the same pest predators, but they, again, they'll make the most of what they can. They're not really choosy. Some of them are, some of them aren't, but that's how they've survived. Mm-hmm.
Are there spiders that eat anything outside of insects?
Some of them actually, when they're babies, is like the black widows. One of the things that they're known for doing. Here she is. Oh dear, she's gone. Actually, they don't wander very far from their web. She wouldn't have done much. She stays in there. She's happy. We can actually go in there, and I can clean in there with tweezers, and she would just hide. She would not be worried at all, and that's something we've kind of learned with them. But the babies, once they emerge, they're really tiny, so the only thing that's really small enough for them to eat are smaller babies. And so that's actually how we allow the babies to work. We don't want to just let them out, and we don't separate them all. So we let some of the babies that are more willing to eat the other babies, because we don't want to use all the fruit flies, which make a huge mess and a huge stink in the room. So yeah, they can be cannibalistic, but most of the time, once they get bigger, and some of the larger spiders will go for, say, like a small lizard or even something like a mouse, but it's really difficult for them to eat mice and vertebrates, because all spiders cannot digest calcium. So the majority of the animal is basically wasted. They cannot digest the calcium in the bones. So most of their prey is invertebrates.
So basically, it's a bibliomorphe that got
No, Sheila was more like a Araneomorphe. Because if you looked at her fangs, she didn't have them coming down. She had them going to the side. And also her eye pattern. And actually, she had a stinger, so I don't know what she is. She's just out there. So she's neither of these.
And then I had a question about how cold affects them. Did you notice
Yes.
they'll enter your house more as it gets to be cooler?
That's because they are actually just coming in for the winter time, and even though the temperature in your house is warmer, they actually slow their metabolism down. My black widows that I've taken care of in the past, I've noticed they'll go suddenly, as the temperature drops, they'll go 3 months. Without fail, they'll go 3 months without eating. And as soon as it starts to warm up again, then they'll break their fast and start eating again. But they just slow the metabolism down. They refuse to eat even if it's available to them. They just stop eating. if they can feel that temperature change. If not, then they tend to be more willing to eat, but sometimes they'll still go on that fast.
So because of that slow metabolism, they can go long periods then.
Without food, and that's similar with reptiles too. I mean, they don't have to eat for months and just gorge themselves when there is a food availability, and then they can go the harder times without eating because they can slow the metabolism down. We have to continually eat because most of our energy is going into heat production. They are exothermic. They don't rely on producing heat. So that's why Rosie, because she's a desert tarantula, she tends to stop and just hang out more on the warmer hands, and she'll just plop down and just sort of rest there and warm up. When she's tired or wants some more energy, she'll just rest on warmer hands. So when we tell people that, no, she just likes your warm hands. It's nothing personal. She just likes your hands. She doesn't know who you are. She just likes your hands.
How old is Rosie? Or is this
We have over 75 working female Rosies. We only use the females because the males tend to be a little more skittish. The girls are a little more calm. But we start working with them around 7 when they're large enough to start being handled, and we continually handle them when they're younger. And in their training, they just get handled so that they're used to walking for at least 2 hours once a week. That's their limit. So that's why we have so many, and we have some specifically for outreaches. But this one right here, she could be, I'd say she might be 8 years old. The female tarantulas in general can, in captivity and sometimes in the wild, large ones, they can be about 30 years old. They can live about 25, 30 years in captivity. And the boys, if I'm recalling correctly, live about 10 years. They start breeding around age 5, and they breed for about 5 years.
just wears them out?
Yeah, they do get worn out pretty easily. It's a very, very energetic process. And the female has to stick around, so... But even as tarantulas, they're very protective mothers. Mm-hmm.
How can you tell the age?
Well, I can't tell the age, but based on her size and how active she is, if they're smaller and a little more active, they're more younger. And I know that she's between at least 7 and 12 because that's about the age that we have them walking. And after about 12 years old, they just sort of get really less willing to walk. They're a little slower. So we retire them to the breeding program. So she is probably between 7 and 12. Hmm?
Have you been bitten by any of your spiders?
No, we try to minimize our handling of them because that just scares them. But no, for the most dangerous ones that we have are like the black widows, our six-eyed sand spiders, but we don't directly come into contact with them. If we want to change them, we'll actually take a little round-tipped tweezers, try to grab one of the front legs, which is the longest, get them out and put them in something clean, and they don't bite. They just try to get away as fast as they can, and it sometimes is nerve-wracking, but I've never been bitten by them. The babies can be a little more crazy, but usually for the tarantulas, the babies, their first line of defense is the abdomen hair, so they don't try to rear up and show the fangs first thing. They actually rear the abdomen up and show you that they're about to kick hairs. And the green bottle blue baby tarantula is crazy. He's always, as soon as he feels the lid go up, his abdomen is raised, he charges out. I have to give him food before I can take his water out. That way he's distracted. And if he's on top of his molt, that's even worse because sometimes he can't eat. Because the fangs are actually too soft to eat. They have to dry for about a week. So I have to find some other way because he's still ready to kick the hairs. Mm-hmm.
The megalomorphae, do they have spin webs too?
No, the megalomorphae are the tarantulas. What they'll do, there are two groups. They're the ones that are the obligate burrowers. They tend to be the ones in the desert areas. They'll actually dig their own burrows using their mouths and their pedipalps, which are the palps that literally means false leg. So what they'll do, they'll dig the burrows, line it with silk to keep them soft and prevent cave-ins. And the other group, some of them are, all these ones are usually in the rainforest. They are the arboreal species, and those are the ones that actually will go up into the trees or like lie flat on bark, and this is like the Indian ornamental or the pink toe tarantula, and those guys actually make these little web hammock sacks, and they just hide in there.
Do they have silk though?
They do all make silk, but it's not strong enough to catch prey. They rely on ambush. They are sit and wait predators. Mm-hmm.
So, you know the scary campfire story about like the spider that lays eggs on or in a person?
That is totally false. The
Yeah,
females cannot. The females are very protective of their babies, so they wouldn't risk laying them in something that could maybe die before the. Now, other animals will lay their eggs in spiders. They're like the tarantula hawk will actually go out, find a large tarantula, sting it, paralyzing it, not killing it. They'll paralyze it and lay an egg on it, and then bury it, and the wasp baby eats the spider alive and basically kills it. But so the spiders themselves don't do that. They guard their babies. And I mean, even with breeders, there's this funny YouTube video where they're trying to get this egg sac away from this female, and as soon as she feels them coming near, she rolls the egg sac away and turns around, and with the egg sac underneath her, and just turns her abdomen to them in a warning. So she doesn't let them anywhere near her egg sac. And some species actually hunt for the babies. Like she'd go and get some food and bring it to the babies while they're developing. Mm-hmm.
Speaking of videos, do you know the video where they claim to give drugs to spiders and look at the effects on their webs?
Try to give
Is it fake or?
Oh, where they throw rocks at the.
No, they claim they give different drugs to spiders, and then they look at the webs and how the webs change.
How the drugs are
Oh, the drugs. I've never heard of that, but it is probably very possible that they do that. See maybe how pesticides influence how the spider's webs are affected. See if certain pesticides, certain drugs, if they're being used as pesticides, how they might impact the effectiveness of them as predators. So it's absolutely a possibility that is a real study, and it has probably very valid reasons for being a study, because they are important predators of insects, and if they're being impaired by certain drugs used in pesticides to kill off pest insects, then these animals aren't going to be as effective, and you're going to lose one of the oldest and probably one of the best insect predators in the area.
So are spiders shipped out as biological controls for insects?
It depends, because again, the spiders, while their hunting techniques might be specific, they're generalist predators. They will be willing to eat almost anything except something that clearly displays that it's dangerous. There are studies showing that spiders will recognize, say, a toxic butterfly. So an orb weaver, they threw a monarch into the orb weaver's web, and the orb weaver could smell, detect the chemicals being released by the animal, and they actually cut the butterfly out of the web while trying to maintain their distance from the animal. So, I mean, they can be specific. They are often considered a good use of control animals, but you have to be very careful not to introduce an invasive species, because they could be maybe too successful. They could introduce a parasite that could harm native species, so it's still something that has to be very, very much controlled.
What are spiders' natural predators? I guess some birds.
Most things, actually, a lot of things. With tarantulas, Rosie is at risk from a lot of predators. Tarantula hawks, birds, coyotes. Yeah, they have tons of predators. They are not on the top. They are just kind of in the middle. They are not really at the top of their food chain web. They're just kind of low on the chain.
Yeah.
So that's why they have that defense of instead of using the venom, which is very expensive and time's taken to make, they will use the abdomen hairs, which every molt they can just regrow every hair. It's basically like getting fiberglass stuck in your skin, or in your nasal passages, or in your throat. Rosie's never kicked hairs because they're a very calm tarantula, but in the wild it's not recommended you try to pick them up because ours are used to people. So
maybe we should take her out.
okay, yeah, and this one actually I'm really happy that they gave me this one because this Rosie, hi girl, I'm just gonna tap her. Gonna be good? Yeah, come on. Yeah, you're a good girl. This one actually really is a good display on her head to show why we call them the Chilean rose hair. They have an iridescent rose-colored hair. Oh, sorry.
Oh, no, you're fine.
See that?
He's more interested than me, I promise.
See that hair, rose hair? That's why they call them the Chilean rose hair. And sometimes we have red morphs, which are actually more like redheads. They just are all over there, just red. It's really pretty. Oh, and right now she's have a look at that. She's actually using her spinnerets right now. See her?
Oh.
See them?
Wow.
Oh, yeah.
She's gonna wrap you up.
She's actually just using it as a drag line. That's basically her safety line to make sure she knows where it's going. But they're basically like two dexterous fingers. So you can see all that silk right there. So it's very sheet-like. And it comes out as a liquid. And the tension that being pulled makes it a solid. You can see, I'm gonna...
So how do the tarantulas compare to some of the other orb spiders that you were talking about that have their...
They don't have it's easy to break these. I can easily, it still stretches, but I really hope she doesn't keep laying on silk because it's not going to be good for her if she wastes that silk. But she seems to have stopped doing that.
Do you want to sit down?
Yeah, that might be a good idea. But yeah, she still has silk coming out. It's not bad, it's just something that they do sometimes. If they feel a little, they want to make sure that they guide themselves home again. So, yeah, just whoop. But she can't see very well. Whoop. So all of those hairs on her body tell her what's going on. Yeah, just completely. It's not very sticky silk. It's just sheet-like to help her find her way back to her burrow. Although she doesn't make a burrow, we don't give them enough substrate for that, and that substrate isn't really good for making a burrow. So she has, we usually give them like a little half of a flower pot, or I'm actually going to move this a little out of the way so I don't get blinded. That's better. So that they don't have to they just like half a flower pot. Anything for them to feel like they can crawl in and not be seen. So basically all spiders. Just one little hide spot, thing of water, some substrate, and every once in a while food. They're pretty low maintenance. But the danger with Rosie is that if anybody drops her, she is not very well armored. Most tarantulas are not very well armored. A spider wouldn't be hurt by being dropped from this height, but she could bounce and break open her abdomen. And her hemolymph does not have platelets, so she would not be able to form like a scab or anything. She would just bleed out. And some of them do survive being dropped, but they have to be put into sick bay. We have a little sick bay tarantulas that recover, and we keep our eye on them, make sure they're not used for anything. They don't have any stress, and sometimes if they get caught in their molts, they have a bad leg afterwards, so we have to keep them in the sick bay for a long time and until they really show signs of recovering. Mm-hmm.
So you guys don't have like hemoglobin, like is it common for them to get like cuts in the wild or whatever?
Hemolymph?
What do they do to like stop the bleeding?
Well, it's not very common for them to get cut. What they will do, what's really is not, it's not too common to see this. I've had the privilege of seeing it, but they can break off their legs. If a predator comes at them and grabs hold of their legs, they have a muscle contraction that will allow the leg to be pulled off and only a small amount of body fluid can be lost to it, but the muscles basically prevent it from bleeding out. And they can keep going without too much trouble.
Can they regenerate that leg?
It depends on the age. If they're really young, they can. But if they're adults, it's very unlikely.
So they would then have to hold that muscle closed for the rest of their life?
It's really not something that they do. It's kind of like, it's like a muscle spasm. It's just not something they do consciously. If the leg is just injured, they'll do that. And they'll actually, and in that case, if the predator doesn't have the leg, they'll actually eat the leg. I've actually seen one of my big wolf spiders do this. She was, I don't know what happened, she pulled her leg off and all of a sudden started eating it and then licking the hemolymph up to clean it up, and she seemed fine. She was okay, and apparently this is normal. Apparently it's normal. They have 8 legs. So one or two is missing one or two is apparently not going to hurt them. But I usually think it's the, at least if they have the back legs and the front legs, they're good. At least for some of the spiders. The wanderers, they can lose whichever one, as long as they're still mobile, they'll be fine. So yeah, if you want me to come around with Rosie, or if you want to come up and see Rosie, you can hold her if you like. I am certified. I am a professional. Thank you guys for coming.
It's really interesting to look at from a distance. I would say.
Yeah, she's not making any more silk though.
Oh yes, very much.
Well, thank you for doing that, Rosie. What a good girl. You see the hair on there?
Let's see.
That's why they're called the Chilean rose hair. They're actually from the Atacama Desert. It's one of the driest places in the world. It's in 2 rain shadows, and the only adequate source of moisture they get is from fog. So these guys are desert tarantulas to the max. Cool.
And do they use the hairs to condense the water as well?
Yeah, they can actually do that too. But they mostly stay in their burrow where it's nice and cool. So yeah, she's pretty relaxed. Some of them are crazier than this, and some of them just refuse to walk. Absolutely, some of them will just dig in their little claws. They have little tarsal claws, and it doesn't hurt. It's just they're just used to help grip substrate so they can actually move.
Can I hold it?
Sure. I need one hand. I have to. Okay, I'll use. Okay,
You
Rosie.
want this one?
Yeah. Just one hand. That one's good. And what I'm gonna do. This is how we do it. It's like this. Come on, girl. So she walks right back to me.
That's what I've been watching for this entire time.
Well, that's why we put our hand there, so she stops. And she's a little poser.
So is this like the warm hand thing?
Yeah, and also the hand. My hand stopped her.
Do they like sweaty hands?
They don't mind.
My hand would be
As long as it's warm, she doesn't mind. She really doesn't. When people say, "Can she sense me being nervous?" Like, she really doesn't care. She doesn't care whether you're nervous or not, as long as you're calm and not throwing her around.
Oh, she weighs like nothing.
That's whoop. Yeah, see that she was a little startled there. Come on, girl.
So how many eyes does she have? Those are on the top, right?
Yeah, she has about 8. Little cluster.
So they're tiny then, right?
Yeah, they're tiny. They rarely ever use them. She's pretty much blind.
Can I try too?
Sure. She is probably a younger one, so she's maybe she's actually 7. She's a little. She was just a little nervous by that, but some of them do that, and they really don't jump. They really don't jog for very long because again they have to catch their breath. All right, you ready? No, she just ran. That's why we always have them pointed towards us.
So that they run up on somebody's arm?
So that nobody gets crazy.
Right. We've had some who actually one of the ladies who works with her said that one lady actually tried to kill Rosie. She actually did like this, And
like an involuntary reaction.
I don't know what it was. She was faking it. She wasn't really going to try to kill Rosie, but that's not something we do. Because the air pressure change could definitely freak Rosie out. And she wouldn't bite, she just runs. And it's easier to control her if we know where she's running to. And she'll calm down because that little run there actually extended her energy quite a bit.
I'm going to take what it could be to see that.
But yeah, when they're born, they're really small. We call them eggs with legs because basically the eggs sprout little legs and absorb the yolk before they do before they become like little tarantulas, and they're all pink. They all start off really pink, and they don't really gain colors until after a few more molts.
So you're saying that pink color on the top is the Chilean?
The Chilean rose hair tarantula.
Okay.
So her false legs, she's moving like legs.
She is. She can move them, but spiders don't use them. She doesn't use them for weight. She just extends them out, sort of just an extra sensing. Just sensing around again. She can actually detect chemicals with them.
Oh wow.
So have any of those ventures you talked about like actually had like commercial success or like commercial like the goat sill or the venom harvesting?
The venom harvesting, absolutely. It's they actually do use spider venom proteins in pain medication along with some other basic stuff.
I actually found a place a few months ago that sells synthetic spider silk by the kilometer. I don't know what people use it for, but you can actually.
Well, yeah, it's not that it's not strong. It's just not as strong. So I mean, well, I mean there has been investigation of using it as bulletproof vests, but again, it's not. It's just like this little paste that they use. It's not as great.
So no spider has evolved over 300 million years.
They have, but
or I mean, has lost the ability to silk.
As far as we know, I mean, the fossil record is huge, and oftentimes we get a very small percentage of what actually lived.
Right.
I mean, awesome.
And most of them, and it's very rare we ever get soft-bodied animals. So I mean, some of her softer parts might not have made it. They thought that there was this giant. They actually called it mesothelae, and they thought it was this giant tarantula or spider-like animal, and it turned out it was just like a sea scorpion that just had a very large flat head. That just was like a bottom feeder. It wasn't dangerous at all. It was just. So I mean, we get changes like that all the time, but.
All right, Chris, take my picture.
Okay.
You thought I was going to make you do it?
I thought you were going to.
I might.
If my husband wouldn't get mad, I'd put it on my belly. And I'm like,
well, Rosie, we're not allowed.
Well,
we're not allowed to do that because once Rosie is, because she again has those little claws and she makes it kind of tricky to get off.
So when she's walking,
It's that pressure. So, I mean, you can see she doesn't look very fluid.
So is that a trait?
Yeah.
Like insects as well?
No, insects have the contraction and extension muscles. These guys, for some reason, it's just rare amongst the arthropods for them to not have both those muscles. But for some reason, tarantulas and spiders don't have that muscle.
It's easier to see in a larger animal. I mean, I don't think I've ever noticed with little spiders.
If you look at the larger orb weavers, it's a little easier to tell, but they're always kind of just awkward. I mean, we've apparently one of my fellow workers held one of our golden orb weavers, and they're big, and they don't hurt you or anything as long as you're just holding them pretty calmly. But it was so awkward. It was just going like, when you're holding them upright, they're just like this.
The way they move.
So what you call the true spiders, the kind that you would find like,
the arboreals
in your home, are they pretty robust then to like the classic, like put the jar over them and slide the paper under them and?
You mean the arboreal tarantulas or?
No, like the whatever.
The true spiders.
The true spiders, like the kind that would be in a house. Like if you're trying to like, get them out.
Yeah, I've seen people take a vacuum to the large huntsmans and they're fine. They vacuum them. They take a vacuum and suction them out, and they found they're still alive in the vacuum. So that's how they transport them out. Because the huntsmans can. It's not that. It's like if they do bite, it's not like it's dangerous, but it can be painful. And the wolf spiders over there, it's not like they're dangerous, but they tend to chew.
You mean they don't do the dry bite or whatever?
The venom wouldn't hurt you, but the fangs, they tend to chew.
So do they take like multiple bites? Or?
No, they tend to grind the fangs in to make a point.
Is their bite going to look like what you showed us, the
brown recluse?
cells and stuff?
No, that's only with the brown recluse and ones that have that neck.
Hold it. Can I hold it?
Oh, okay. Well, it has to be the necrotoxin, which is the blood toxin, the cytotoxin.
Alright, so what do I do?
One here.
That warm hand.
She's thinking about it. She likes the warm hand, huh? I had just washed my hands.
She's fine.
Do the lotion, none of that stuff bothers them?
No, they're pretty sturdy. Okay. They really don't care. As long as you're calm, they won't.
Right, well,
they won't
keep
care.
Coming then.
She's totally fine as long as you are nice to her. She is nice to you. And her temperament is not unusual. Some other tarantulas, like the curly-haired tarantula, the Texas tan tarantula, they're pretty calm. So
they can jump, can't they?
No, they don't jump very high. I mean, if they do, it's not a very long distance. It might seem like they jump, but they really don't.
It feels like really soft.
They're very soft, yeah.
It's almost like you have just like a stuffed animal just going slowly across your hand.
It feels like Q-tips. It's more like Q-tips, I'd say. I tell the kids, like, yeah, as long as you're not a cricket or a bug, you're safe.
Thank you, Kelly. This was really fun.
Yeah, it was
This was fun to do.
Thanks.
This is the first presentation I understood. Yes.